Hi class. What we're going to be doing in this particular assignment is pretty similar to what we did before in some of our earlier assignments where we're taking the same design and what we're really just doing is changing the color harmony or the colors and just see how does that change things. So the two color harmonies we're looking at is complement and split complement. And complement and split complement, as their names imply, they're quite related to one another with some important differences. One of the things to keep in mind is that we are moving from, remember in milestone one we covered monochrome, which is one hue, remember, and then mono means one, and then the next uh, harmony we looked at, which is just a little bit more complex, is the triadic, which is, let me just grab a color wheel in here, hold on. So just taking a look here at the color wheel. Okay, so we went from the monochrome, which is one hue, one single hue, and then we went to the analogous, which is approximately three hues on a color wheel, any three hues. You actually can cross over warm and cool. I know that the assignment that we did back here recommended you stay on warm or cool side, but you actually can go anywhere as long as you just keep that small chunk. So analogous is also still a pretty quiet harmony, in the sense like if you're looking for quiet harmonies, analogous is a really good one. Monochrome is good too. You can make it more vibrant with more saturated, both of these more vibrant with more contrast or saturated colors, but in general we can think of them as kind of calm and serene, more serene. Now we're getting to complementary colors, which is right across from the color wheel, right across, directly across. Complement is where we're only using two hues. So in terms of hues, it's not that complex. We just have two hues, but because they're across from each other, they tend to really push and pull at each other. They tend to have kind of they're like always sort of balancing, trying to get to balance. Um, and so when you want a little bit more energy or a dynamic quality to your harmony, you could work with the complements. They're really good for that. Now, the split complement, I think of as a little more designerly, in the sense that they have a little more nuance to them, but they still have a little bit of that push and pull of the complement, but it's a little softer. And so how do you get a complement? You go across the color wheel, right across, but then on one side, you either branch off on this side, so you go the red, and then you have yellow, green, and a blue, green. That is your three hues, so we have one more hue instead of the two of the complement. Or you would go to the other side, you'd start with green, and you'd branch off into the orangey red and the violet red. So it's like a split, it's like a little Y shape. Okay, and that's the split complement. So complement, split complement, really good harmonies to know about. Okay, let's go back into bridge here, and yeah, so we'll take a look at everyone's work. Really interesting compositions. I like the direction everyone's going in. Um, I can just tell everyone's got a really interesting use of shape and spatial composition. So maybe we'll have a few things to say about that to, how we could work on the compositions. But in general, I think everybody's really right on track here with creating, just as very, I think, very strong compositions. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, Chris. Well, yes, your composition looks really good. You have this really interesting pattern, um, and it's very um, well organized. And in this class, I think throughout the class, all the way to the end of class, you can continue to work with patterns like this looks sort of a bit like a textile or wallpaper pattern or something, some other type of pattern you might see, upholstery, that kind of thing. And so color works really great, like experimenting color with just using something like this, an abstract pattern. So feel free, anybody, to keep doing this all the way to the end of class. That way you can just really focus on color. Um, okay, so again, I think your composition looks good, no need to change that. Now for your colors, what you want to do is make sure that you are going across the color wheel, all the way across when you choose your colors. Okay, this could probably, if somebody looked at this, they might think that it is an analogous harmony. Okay, so go across here. So if you want to work with the green, you'd go to this magenta color. If you want to work with blue, you'd work with yellow in the subtractive harmony. And then you would get a complementary harmony. So just take out the other, if you work with magenta and green, then just take out the blue. Okay, and then this other one here, for this one, it's interesting, you're actually working almost with a triad, close, which is what we're studying next week, so you might want to think about using these colors again. But for this one, what you would want to do is, you're actually pretty close here. Let's go across here. So you would go across the color wheel to the orange here, across, and then you'd branch out. So you'd use green, red, and orange. So you would actually just move the violet over to the red. That's it. And then you would have a split complement. Okay, so that's really all you need to do here. I think you're working with value. That the assignment asked you to, or I should say, to think about working with areas that have variations in value, or I should say contrast. That can be value contrast, but contrast. So for example, here, in this area here, you have lower contrast, right? Like the difference between this color and this color in terms of the value is lower. It doesn't have like that, you get softer edges that way. Whereas here, you've got a lighter value and a darker background, so you get a more of an edge here around that circle, and that gives us, that's what the high contrast is meant. So you're playing with both of those. Something you can think about doing, is true for everybody, is in your background, you can continue, your background here would be this one or this one. You can continue, if you like, to use some of those depth principles that we learned about last week, where, what you might do for this one, for example, is put in like a sort of a darker, cooler color into the background, potentially. I don't know if it's, you don't always have to have depth in design. A lot of times, we don't necessarily, aren't really going for that, but just suggesting, if you wanted to continue to practice those principles. Okay, so I think the main thing is to just tweak your colors here. Okay, Deidriona. Yeah, no, don't worry, you were on time. And just an FYI, everybody, that it is good to be on time, but just keep in mind that, like, for example, if the deadline is on Sunday, you can work through the night, and as long as it's posted by early morning or late morning, it's like, because right now it's 9 o'clock my time, and when I'm doing the critique, if it's available when I do the critique, then I consider it on time because it's, available for me to use. So if you're a few hours late officially over the deadline, don't worry about it, as long as, you get that in. Some people really like to work late at night, they're night owls, and so, feel free to do that. Okay, so, yeah, this is a really cool design. I love it in terms of how you've played with the star shape. The 5-pointed star, you'll probably, if you use this in other classes, you'll start to hear people instructors talk about the 5-pointed star, the dreaded 5-pointed star. And the reason why is because it tends to be a little bit of a cliched shape in design, as are hearts. I'm thinking of some other ones, but those are the two main ones. So if you do use a star, though, what you've done here by really playing with the star is what you want to do is like overlapping, creating little patterns, breaking it apart in different ways. That's really the way to make a cliched shape like the 5-pointed star a little fresher, which I think you have done. The other thing you can do is, like, instead of the 5-pointed star, you can make it like 6 or 7. That can also, in addition, it can make it a little fresher, but I think what you've done is fine here. So talking about the color, so just like Chris before, I think what you need to do here is you need to tweak your colors. I would also just maybe for both of you, like, take a look at the reading for complements, so that you really start to understand it. The textbook and the learning path goes into much more detail than I do here on what a complement is and the nature of the complement, but you want to make sure you're working directly across from the color wheel for this one. And then for this one, you want to make sure that you're working just like we said before, the split complement, the little y. So you want to revise this one too. They're really beautiful colors that you have. They're just this one actually to me looks is actually a triadic, or pardon me, an analogous. And this one it isn't actually a harmony that we use. So I think you could easily tweak both of those. Like maybe you could decide, like if you like this orange color, for example, you could go across from the orange, so you keep some of that orange. If you like this magenta color, which is very pretty, keep that as one side of your, or your reddish color, keep it as one side and then go to the Y on the other side. Okay, the other thing that I would add here is you have low contrast throughout both of these designs, meaning that the change between these colors, even though we do see a change in hue, the change is not creating that sense of contrast, that high contrast. So some areas in here, I would put in some more high contrast, like maybe this would be a little lighter, and so that you get more of that kind of that contrast change. So one of the things the assignment talks about is how contrast can create a sense of emphasis. Maybe I'll actually just go over to the examples and we'll take a look at those. So here's one of the examples, and so here what you can see here is that let me see if I can get this a bit bigger. So areas that you see more contrast is the area that you will generally start to read as more of the emphasis. Like in here, these areas in here, because this is the lighter color against some darker colors, we start seeing this little area in here, maybe even this one, as being more of a focal point in here. And in here, we see a lot more low contrast, and so our eye is not pulled in that direction. And then here, take a look at this, which to you would maybe seem like the areas of focal point. I'm tending to see maybe these white circles, maybe in here too, as being more of the focal point. Let's go to the other example as well. So in this one, you can see that the entire background, like the background, these swirly, pinkish, all the pinkish color is at the background, is all low contrast, and it so fades in the background. Now these green circles are the areas that create the contrast. They're all like they bring our eye to this because there's a change. There's a big change here between the green and the background. And the same is true here with the background is pretty all low contrast, and the circles here stand out more, but especially I think this circle here, the red, is creating a lot of contrast to the background, sort of reading as the lightest color, the most vibrant color. Okay, I hope that helped, and yeah, let me know if you have any questions about revisions, but I'll look forward to seeing it. I'm sure it'll look great. Okay, Sora, yeah. So you've done a really nice job here at choosing the harmonies. You've got your complement and your split complement. A really nice job here. You dialed them in very accurately, which is really great. And I think yours is really a good example of like really the differences between like the complement tends to be a little bit more, again, that sort of push and pull. It's not quite as nuanced. And then you move into the split complement and suddenly you get that additional hue, and it just sort of has a little bit more of a, I think of it as more of a sort of a sparkle or a designerly quality. It's one of those harmonies, I think when you use the harmony in a real world application, people will say, wow, that's amazing. How did you do that? I wouldn't think those colors would go together, because it's not in the sort of the, like the complement seems to make more sense, or the monochrome or the analogous, but the split complement I feel like has a little bit of a twist. Yeah, so the only thing I would say here is maybe play with the composition a little bit more. I like this, the stripes you have, I think they look awesome. Maybe I might consider making them a little wider maybe. It feels like you've got a lot of negative space here, so I might just like take your circles, make them a bit bigger, maybe the stripes a bit bigger, maybe play with where you place the circles. It almost feels like they want to either kind of all be in the same place in relation to the stripes, or maybe in the center of these little cubby holes, really like put them precisely in the center. So I might just play with that a little bit but otherwise, I think this looks really good, and it's definitely um, a good example of the harmonies. Okay, Janae, yeah, this also is a really cool composition. It's very interesting pattern with uh, triangles rotated with uh, rectangles. I think that looks awesome. So for this one, what you want to do is you want to just make sure that you stay within one single color wheel and work with a complement. So for example, with this one, traditional, you'd go right across here. And then so you'd have this green and red. And then with this one, you'd have this green and this, kind of reddish, very cool red right across. Okay, so you just want to change that a little bit. Looks like you're working with differences in contrast. You've got a lot of low contrast plus some high contrast. So it's just a matter of tweaking that a little bit. For this one, these are actually really nice color choices you have here. It's the one thing you'd want to shift here is you'd want to shift from this orange. You want to take that orange and take that out and then add this red in its place. That way you get the little, the Y shape that we're looking at for the split. Like just think of it's like we start here, we go across, and then we split across. So instead of going here, we go to the side. Okay, so that's what you want to do with that one. Yeah, I'll look forward to seeing your revision. Okay, Cassie, yeah, Winter Night Sky, definitely. Yeah, let's see here. I think you've done a good job here choosing your colors. So you've got a complement here of that's our classic complement of purple and yellow. These are all classic complements here in the traditional wheel. And the split complement, yes, that looks great too. Nice. And you are playing with value changes or lower contrast in places. Maybe, okay, so what I might do with this one, the first thing I would do here if I were working on this is I would take off the black outlines. I talked about this back in Milestone 1, which is, I know it's getting further away now, but when you work with these black outlines, what you essentially do is it's like a stained glass window where it flattens a design, and it tends to inhibit colors from interacting with each other. Very occasionally, you may want to do something like this in a design situation where you want to really separate elements. In general, though, what we always want to do is liberate elements and make them interact. So I would take that off. Then the next thing I might do is I might play, first of all, a little bit more with the composition. I might do some overlapping here. Like if we look back at Deidreana's design, you might want to play a little bit more with, overlapping sizes. Think about maybe also diminishing sizes, which I think you've done here, but then maybe add some overlapping. Really experiment with that. Push it a little bit more. Something to keep in mind too is just, let the design. We don't have for these exercises. We're really can just explore creatively and really make a composition without a lot of constraints. We have some, like in terms of the harmonies, but in general, you can really play with these. And so don't worry if you can just start doing things, and you can let the idea of the night sky be very abstract, like inspiration, and let it and just play within that, and don't worry too much about making it look even slightly realistic. It can just be, something else. And then the other thing I would do is maybe play a little bit more with adding some of these different, saturations in here with the stars. Think about what we covered in last week when we looked at, remember we looked at the principles of how colors recede. That could be interesting to play with in here too. And then just kind of think about too working with lower contrast areas and higher contrast areas. I think this one is the one you'd want to play with that a little bit more. I see that happening in here, where I see some more lower contrast areas and a higher contrast area. Okay, so just keep experimenting a little bit more with the design, and have fun. What I like to do is once once I've settled on kind of like a direction in terms of a design, and I know that the composition is, I could do better with my composition. What I'll often do, especially when, I mean, only when I'm working digitally, because it's the only place it works, is save my file under different names. So I would just maybe add like version 1, version 2 to the file name and just keep saving it, like the Photoshop or Illustrator file, and keep saving several versions of it, and really quickly, very quickly, start making sort of little drafts of using the elements and just having fun. So that way you don't get too stiff with your design, because if you're doing 10 designs in an hour or whatever you're doing, then you can afford to really make mistakes and experiment, and that's often where you get some really cool things happening. So that's what I might recommend you do, just to push this to the next level and kind of start, experimenting. Okay, Joe. Yeah, I love this element that you've created right here. That's super cool. Again, it's like a way of taking the 5-pointed star and just really experimenting with it and making it into something pretty, new and different, which is great. And let's see. So you've got, yeah, your magenta and your green. I think probably maybe this one right here, or this one, doesn't really matter. But that looks good. And then in this one, you've got pink and blue and orange. Probably maybe in here. Yes? Or maybe in here. I think this is probably where you've done it. I think so, yeah. So, yeah, so what I would say for this one is I might experiment a little more with the design. I think that, I love this element, and I think this is an interesting element too, these kind of banners. Um, but I feel like maybe you could really just work with this element and just repeat this over the design a little bit, or even create a pattern with it. These elements don't feel quite as complete, they're okay. They are blending in. I like the kind of angular look of them that works with the angles of this, but I might just go with these guys and experiment with them, and maybe bigger, different sizes, just kind of play with them over the space maybe. Um, and Yeah, I think that would be the main thing I'd work on. Maybe think about working with some of those depth principles we talked about, where like the background could be the cooler color, maybe this element could be the warmer color. So maybe you could switch these colors just to kind of, again, bring in what we learned last week. That could be an interesting way to develop this, so you'd sort of get more of a sense of this shape floating in a sort of a deeper space. So that could be interesting. For this one right here, so one of the things that I think this assignment, it works well to sort of distribute the colors a little bit more in the space. So this is the only place you have the orange, and this is the only place you have the pink. Well, and actually the pink is starting to appear a little bit in there. But it's good in terms of unity to use your colors, oh, there it is, use your colors within the entire space. So like, for example, Deidriona, in hers, she's got blue here and here, the orange goes through here, threads through here, and having that kind of sense of the designs going through, threaded through the design, really can make a big difference in how your design is perceived. In terms of its unity. So if you repeat this shape, for example, a few different times, then you can start like playing with all of these like little shapes, cool little shapes you have in here, and playing with, threading the colors through. Actually, this one, I think this side is doing pretty good with that, because you only have 2 colors, but this is the side that maybe could have more. And oftentimes to fix that, we just maybe add a little bit more to the design, or add a little more complexity to be able to get the colors in there. So I would keep playing with that. I would watch, I've talked about this before, watch using a real solid black in the background. It's better to kind of work with like even something like that right here in your background. I'm not sure if I can do this here, but okay, there it is. So this is just this teal color as a really sort of dark tone. And you can see that how it still reads as pretty dark. You could even probably go even wee bit darker on it, but it'll bring in that harmony a little bit more, so it all ties together. Okay, so that's what I'd work on here. Do remember, just if you can, to save this as a JPEG file when you submit it to the final submission area. And okay, everybody, I think that's it. Let me know if you have any questions.